Good morning, game theorists. Today we are in chapter 16, learning about bidding strategy and auction design. So you might not have thought of auctions as being games, but they do still fit in our general framework. Remember, a game has three elements: has players, has strategies, and has payoffs. So the players in this case are the bidders at the auction. There is strategic interaction between the players. The outcome of the auction for you depends upon not just on your own bid, but also upon what other people are bidding. So that's another thing that's common in game theory. So the strategies in this case are the bids, and the payoffs are going to be the value of the object you win minus whatever you paid for it, if you win the auction. If you don't win the auction, then things are kind of the same, so probably a payoff would be modeled as 0. So auctions can be modeled as games. So we'll look at 4 kinds of auctions. So the first kind of auction is called an ascending auction. That's one you're probably most familiar with. So the auctioneer starts with a very low price, and then they gradually raise it up and up and up as more people keep bidding higher and higher. That's why it's called ascending, it's increasing the bids. There's also what's called a descending auction. So in that case, the auctioneer begins with a very high price, and they gradually lower it down and down and down until someone is finally willing to bid. And there are also some other variations. So most auctions you're familiar with are a first price auction. By that we mean the winner is the one who makes the highest bid, and they pay what they bid. So if you bid 90 and you win the auction, you pay 90. So another kind of auction out there is called a second price auction. So in that case, you still have the highest bid wins, but the highest bidder doesn't pay what they bid. What they end up paying is the amount of the second highest bid. You guys just played an in-class game that was a second price auction. So at first it might seem kind of strange as to why you'd ever have a second price auction. Wouldn't the auctioneer make more money if they collected the highest bid rather than the second highest bid? However, there is a logic to the second price auction, and we'll learn more about that shortly in this chapter. So one thing to keep in mind for now is that people do change their bidding strategy if you have a second price auction versus a first price auction. So in some cases, it might actually be equal for how much revenue comes in with either auction because you'll bid differently in a second price auction. So you have a second price auction, you get the amount of the second highest bid, but people might bid more in a second price auction. So that can lead to the same revenue as a first price auction. But again, we'll see more about that later in this chapter. So there are also some variations on how the auction is conducted. So there are open outcry auctions. So that means you're announcing your bid in a way that's publicly known. So like you're saying your bid aloud, or if you're raising your hand or raising your sign to indicate you're bidding. So what it basically boils down to is that other people know what you're bidding if it's an open outcry auction. The alternative is what's called a sealed bid auction. So the name sealed presumably comes from you put your bid in an envelope and you seal it so nobody else knows what you bid. During class game was a sealed bid auction. Each group made its choice independently, and other groups didn't know what you're bidding. Oh, so your group didn't know what other groups were bidding. So here's just a quick example of how a second price auction would work. So for terminology, this is also called the a Vickrey auction, after the economist who, I'm not sure if he introduced the idea or if he popularized it, but in that case it got associated with Vickrey. That's why your in-class game was called the Vickrey game. So person 1 bids, let's call it B1, and person 2 is bidding B2. Person 3 bids B3, etc., etc. So just to put some numbers in there, let's say that bid 1 is going to be 17, and bid 2 is going to be 30. Bid 3 is 12, and bid 4 is 27. So highest bid wins in a second price auction, so that'd be 30 in this case. So person 2 bid that. Because we're in a second price auction here, or a Vickrey auction, the amount they pay is the amount of the second highest bid. So the second highest bid here is 27. So person 2 wins because of the highest bid, but they pay not 30. They don't pay 30, they pay 27 instead. That's how a Vickrey auction works. So I mentioned there's an element of strategic interaction in auctions. You have to consider when you're making your bid not just how much do I think this object is worth, but also what do I think other people are going to bid. So because there's strategic interaction, that's where game theory plays a role. So one issue to be aware of in auctions is something called the winner's curse. So you usually think winning's a good thing, but if you win an auction by bidding too much, you're going to feel like a loser. Like if you bid $100 for something that's only worth $20, you won because you got the object, but you're worse off. So as an example of this that sometimes comes up in econ classes, I've never done this myself, but I've heard about it. So what the econ professor will do is they'll bring this big jar of coins to class, and you can look at the outside of the jar, but you can't go counting up how much value the coins have. So just know there's a lot of quarters in there, a lot of pennies, a lot of dimes, but I'm not quite sure precisely what that jar is actually worth. So what they do is then they auction off the jar to the highest bidder. So each from your best guess of what that jar is worth, how much value all those coins have, and you bid accordingly. So the person who wins the auction, they get to get that big jar of coins, and they go count up later and find out how much is it actually worth. Sometimes they find that they overbid, like they end up paying $20 for a jar of coins, and the coins are only worth $15. Now, the winner's curse is often portrayed as being evidence of irrationality. You might see people say things like, I got so excited at the auction that I just had to keep bidding higher and higher, and I ended up bidding too much. Now, for starters, even that by itself is not necessarily irrational. It is a myth that it causes us to assume that people are unemotional. That is entirely untrue. We never assumed that people don't have emotions. So don't listen to that nonsense from the social science section of the media. And even you can see the winner's curse arrive even if people do not get carried away with emotions. So the winner's curse is not necessarily irrational. So to see how that is true, let's think about what people be thinking about when they're at an auction. So in my example, we said you could be bidding for a jar of coins, but you're uncertain of what is the value of all the coins in the jar. So some people will overestimate the value of the coins, and some people could underestimate it. And maybe on average, the estimates would be correct. So we're all just guessing how many coins in the jar, what those coins are worth. But auctions are not based on the average bid. Auctions are all about what's the highest bid. So even if the average person gets it roughly right, that does not get rewarded at all. What happens is that the person who makes the highest bid now probably be someone who overestimated the value. So because of this risk, you only win the auction when you're potentially assigned too high of a value. You're probably going to bid below your value in a first price auction, a typical auction. But even then, if you overestimate by a large amount, you can still end up with the winner's curse. So the winner's curse is not necessarily proof of irrationality. So this brings us to bidding strategies. So first I'll talk more about the first price auction, which is one you are more familiar with. So that's one where you pay what you bid and highest bid wins. Oops, I should say first price, not first pay. So for some notation, we'll say B is your bid and V is the value of the object. So your payoff, which is known as pi, will be the value of the object minus your bid if you're the winner. And if you don't win the auction, you go back with what you came in with. So no change, 0 if you lose. So I can present the idea I mentioned earlier with this notation a bit more formally. So you never want to intentionally bid above V. Because that would mean if you win the auction, then you're paying too much. So like I said, the winner's curse can still arise even if everyone's rational, because if there's uncertainty about V and people are just taking guesses, then this might happen by chance. But if you know what V is, then you should never bid above that. Or if you have a best guess of what V is, never bid above what that best guess is. Now, in a first price auction, you should not bid equal to your value either. That's because if you win the auction, you're paying exactly what the object's worth, so you have no net benefit. It's like if you bid $10 for a jar of coins and the coins are worth $10. All you've done is trade $10 for $10. There is no benefit from doing that. So instead you want to bid below the object's value. Now, the math gets rather complicated for precisely how much below you should bid, and it gets beyond the scope of this course with the math involved. But I'll just outline the general idea in words. So if you bid below the value of the object, then if you win, you get some surplus. So if that jar of coins is worth $10 and you bid $9, then you have a gain if you win. You would gain $1 overall. The risk, though, is if you bid too low, then someone else can outbid you, and then you get nothing. So you want to bid high if you still can win the auction, but low if you still have some surplus if you do win. So you got to think about what's the lowest I could bid and still win the auction. So there's some element of strategy there. So that's how first price auctions work. So we come back for our next episode. We're going to look at the second price auction. We'll look at what is optimal strategy in that Victory game you guys played earlier.